So there's a guy by the name of James Lindsay, and James Lindsay has sort of created this path for himself as, you know, one of the anti-woke guys. Like his whole political identity and public persona is built around wokeness bad. Which, look, I'm a leftist, but I'm a critic of wokeness too. Everybody knows that. I talk about it all the time. I don't like crackdowns on free speech, free expression. I think sometimes people can get a little silly with joke policing and things of that nature, but I have things in context and perspective. That doesn't dominate all of my commentary. Not everything comes back to that. And, you know, what do I care most about? I care about the working class. I care about economics. I want to raise wages. I want to give people more vacation time. I want to have universal health care in the U.S. You just want to create a happy, healthy, prosperous country where everybody's got a shot. You know, not equality of outcome, equality of opportunity, and a reasonable floor from which people can, you know, start and live their lives. So, James Lindsay, this is in my experience, this is one of the first times I've seen him sort of dip his toe a little bit outside of the wokeness lane. So he's going to try to talk about, you know, global politics here. And I've now watched this clip 3 or 4 times. So this is like, you know, my 4th or 5th time watching it. I'm going to try my absolute best to be charitable and to listen to these comments in context and try to make sense of it. But it's all over the place. And this is like Olympic level word salad. Let's watch and then I'll respond.
That they had to incorporate fascism to make communism work. And so how did they do this? Well, Mao did his thing. The CCP runs China into a disaster. A couple of leaders later, you have Deng Xiaoping working with Kissinger and so on, and they open up the markets of China. But it's all at the pleasure of the party. It's all state capitalism, which is by definition fascism. So what do you have there? You have a communism with fascism inside of it. Communo-Fascism. So what is the dialectical opposite of Communo-Fascism? It's a fascism with communism inside of it. Fascio-communism. So you have East Asia. We just don't have Oceania to always be at war with East Asia yet. So if you make China into this behemoth, a communism with fascism running inside of it, so that it solves the production problem of the Soviet disaster of communism because it has now an open market that's running state capitalism, but still very wealth-generating market. Mm-hmm. And then you can create the opposite of that in the West. If you can create a fascist oligarchy that decides to, sure, the people on the top are going to be the lords and ladies of the new aristocracy, and we are all going to be the serfs, mined for our data and our pod while we enjoy our mealworms and crickets. But it'll be equitable. So if you take that fascist structure and stick a communism inside of it, and then those are the two world powers, not exactly enemies, but frenemies. Mm-hmm. A communism with fascism inside next to a fascism with communism inside, and you let those things run next to each other, the natural process of the dialectic will eventually fuse all of it. And what you'll end up with is the kingdom. You'll end up with communism that works this time. And I think that that's the program. And so they are definitely using the race Marxists because the Marxists are extraordinarily destabilizing. But the people who are funding this, the people who are dumping millions upon millions of dollars, billions of dollars into critical race theory to drag it out of the university where it should have just kind of languished because it's stupid. It got funded out of the university. That's how. It didn't spontaneously get out of the university. Bags and bags and bags of cash got dumped into fueling these movements, especially around the Occupy Wall Street time. To protect the banks. And so the fascist with the communist inside was born. And that's the objective. And because this is their magic. It's their faith. They believe that if you put those two opposites next to each other, and they're the only two opposites, that eventually the dialectical process will average it all out, but raise it up to a higher level. The Marxist word for that is sublate.
One of my pet peeves is when somebody's trying to explain something, and instead of being as clear and concise and punchy and short as possible, they do the opposite. They make it as wordy as possible, as convoluted and obscure as possible, because that strikes me as a lack of clarity of thought. Like, it's almost verbose on purpose. It seems like it's verbose on purpose. So look, I told you, I listened to this a number of times. I'm going to try to transcribe what he said here, but wish me luck. So he's saying China is communo-fascism. America is fascio-communism. We're going to get to these terms and these definitions in a second, so bear with me. And he says, ultimately, the natural process of the dialectic is going to fuse all of it. And my guess is he's trying to say it fundamentally is a global plot where we have fascio-communism or Communo-Fascism that runs all of us with like a global government thing. And he's trying to discuss what he thinks is the process that gets us to that point. That's what I think he's trying to say. Now, nobody, even if they're a huge James Lindsay fan, can watch this segment and tell me I'm not being as charitable and kind as possible in trying to interpret what the hell he's saying. Now, let's start breaking it down, because that's the more important point. The definition of communism: a political theory derived from Karl Marx advocating class war and leading to a society in which all property is publicly owned and each person works and is paid according to their abilities and needs. I don't think there's any real communist nation in the country. All property is publicly owned and each person works and is paid according to their abilities and needs. Fascism. Definition of fascism: a form of far-right authoritarian ultranationalism characterized by dictatorial power, forcible suppression of opposition, and strong regimentation of society and the economy that rose to prominence in the earliest 20th century in Europe. So that's the definition of fascism. What are the actual different countries in this conversation? Well, the United States, I think it's fair to call the United States an oligarchy. And he does use that word once in that rant, although it's sort of a side point, because broadly he thinks the U.S. is fascio-communism and China is communo-fascism. The U.S. I would describe as an oligarchy. It functions as an oligarchy. You have corporations and billionaires that effectively bought the government, own the government, rigged the laws and the rules in their favor. We are on paper a constitutional republic and a representative democracy, but I think functionally speaking, just like that Princeton study, it came out years ago, found about a decade ago, we are functionally more of an oligarchy. I think that's the best word to describe the U.S. You could use kleptocracy. You could use, it's certainly a version of capitalism, right? But I would say oligarchy is the best word for the U.S. When it comes to China, I think the most accurate description, they're communist in name. They're not functionally communist. They're more state capitalist. So it's sort of, I would just call it like authoritarian capitalism is probably the most straightforward way to describe China. Where his whole theory breaks down is this notion that there's going to be the fusion of it through the natural dialectic process, and there's going to be some one world government. We are so far from anything resembling a one world government, and I don't think we would ever get there. The League of Nations was a horrendous failure. The United Nations is an absolute joke. We violate international law and ignore international law on a daily basis in every way imaginable, with our illegal wars, with our sanctioning of medicine going into Iran, which is leading to deaths, with what we're doing in Yemen right now, with what Biden's doing to Afghanistan, starving the country effectively. The idea that there's going to be some fusion, I mean, this is Alex Jones territory, right? Like there's going to be the NWO, the New World Order, or what they used to say, Glenn Beck used to say was Agenda 21 was coming. Now they talk about the Great Reset is coming. You don't need to get to that next level of conspiracy to talk about all the problems in the system. The conspiracy is open. It's open. The conspiracy is that the billionaires and the corporations effectively run everything in the United States of America. That's the conspiracy, and all the decisions are made for the benefit of the billionaires and the corporations. To say it's fascio-communism in the U.S., what? No, it's not. And, you know, in some ways, it's sort of a contradiction in terms there. That's not to say that there's no such thing as an authoritarian left government. There is. That's a real thing. But that's not what we're talking about here. Fascio-communism is not what the U.S. is. Communo-fascism is not what China is. And he's all over the place with these really convoluted, weird terms and theories, and it is confusing, maybe on purpose. And look, this guy has made, he has made a habit of this. I read some of his tweets, and his tweets are always, you're scratching your head like, I don't even think that makes sense to you, bro. He'll bring in these different philosophers and then link it to some political theory or economic theory, and everybody who reads it's got to be like, what? Some people get tricked and think, oh, well, he's just a genius, and you just don't understand his high-minded descriptions. The other part, which, again, there are parts where he totally loses me. He talks about the natural process of the dialectic will fuse it all together. No, money rules everything. That's the way it works. It's not just through open dialogue and the dialectic that's what eventually fuses everything together. And the US and China are not really, we are more enemies than frenemies. We are. We trade with them, and that's probably the only thing that stops it from being outwardly hostile. But yeah, the Belt and Road Initiative, for example, China's expanding. The US doesn't like that. We're the country that has somewhere between 700 and 900 military bases around the world. There are disputes now over certain places. We're concerned about the thing in Taiwan. There is not going to be a fusion of the two and this NWO approach. But then he says, he brings up the race Marxists. Okay, but that's not a thing. Marxism is about class. You say race Marxist, that's sort of a contradiction in terms. There are people who can be Marxist and also buy into one level or another of identity politics, but there's nothing inherent to Marxism. Race Marxism is not a thing. And he brings up Occupy Wall Street. Are they complicit in a negative sense with your grand theory here? Because I got news for you. Occupy Wall Street was one of the forces trying to push back against the influence of big money in politics and corporate power and billionaire control. They were pushing back against that. They were part of the solution. And I don't know, maybe he is saying they're part of the solution. I don't know. I'm trying to be as charitable as possible here, but guys, it doesn't. What he's saying here doesn't make sense. It's really ultimately a bunch of mumbo jumbo. Communo-Fascism and fascio-communism and the natural process of the dialectic will fuse it together. And I love how Glenn Beck is sitting there pretending it's profound. My God. My God. See, he takes 2 steps outside of the wokeness bad arena, and you get this sort of stuff. Somehow the race Marxists and Occupy Wall Street feed into the picture, and they're destabilizing, but the natural process of the dialectic will give us fascio-communism and communo-fascism. And no. The real issue, the real problem is oligarchy and imperialism. Corporate power, billionaire wealth, and the iron hold on government to the point that they exacerbate all problems, like income and wealth inequality, climate change, you name it. So, there you have it. There is going to be no fusing of communo-fascism and fascio-communism. The conspiracy is open. The conspiracy is what I just described. And a little bit of advice here for Mr. Lindsay. If I were you, I would try to simplify everything down and explain your theory in as straightforward a way as possible. Don't complicate it with weird new terms you made up and pretend like it's profound when really it's massively confused at best. Hey y'all, do me a favor and like and subscribe. It helps out big time in the algorithm. Click the bell as well for notifications when videos drop, and watch that video on screen right now. You know you want to.